Hey guys, welcome back to Jump Mathematics. In today's video, we're going to be covering some of the problems that come along with zero. So first off, we'll talk about dividing 0 by 0, and then we'll also include in that what the terms indeterminate and undefined mean, and how they describe certain situations in algebra with 0. Finally, we're going to talk about raising 0 to the 0th power, and why we can't do that. So we're going to start off with what happens when we divide non-zero numbers by 0. So we're going to specifically look at y equals 1 over x and graph that, because this is an excellent equation to understand what happens to y as x approaches 0. And that's a great use of dependent and independent variables. So I'm going to start off with just generating a table, and I just put in a bunch of numbers in here. And I did the negative side and the positive side. I left out 0 because we're trying to see what happens to y as x approaches it, not when x is 0. So 1 over negative 5 is just negative 1/5. Then we have the same here, negative 1/4, negative 1/3. So now what happens with this is we have 1 over a fraction, and that just means we multiply by the reciprocal. So I get negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, and negative 5. Same thing here with the positives. I'm just going to write them all out really quickly. So now we have our list of points and we're ready to graph them. For simplicity's sake, I didn't put all the numbers on the x and the y axis. I just graphed negative 5, negative 4, negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, negative 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, 1/5, because these are the values that we have to graph. And the same on the y-axis. And I have to draw a line through the dots. Perfect, so now we have our graph of y equals 1 over x. So now we can kind of see what happens to y as x approaches 0. So let's look at it from the left side. So we can see that it looks like it's approaching 0 as we travel to the left, but we want to see what happens when x is close to 0. So looking at it from the left side, moving to the right, I'm going to follow this line, and I can tell that it's going to keep going down and down and down until it reaches, well, it will never reach it, but it looks like it'll be negative infinity, basically. So then what happens when I go from right to left? So I'm going to start at the right, I'm going to follow it up and up and up and up, and it's going to keep and shoot through the top of the graph until it looks like it's at positive infinity. So this is why we say dividing a non-zero number by 0 is undefined, is because there is no value for it. It can either be negative 0 or negative infinity or positive infinity. It changes when you do stuff in 3 dimensions with 3 variables. So there is no 0 for it. So let's define undefined. It's as simple as that. There is no value for it, so it cannot be defined. So now let's talk about what happens when we try to divide 0 by 0. So let's look at some basic properties of algebra, or math even. When I have a divided by a, that just equals 1 when a does not equal 0, right? So that's basically just saying that anything divided by itself is 1. Now let's look at what happens when we divide 0 by a. We get 0 when a is not equal to 0. So let's use some substitution. Let's just replace a with 0. So let's forget this, okay? Let's replace a with 0. Well, we have 2 definitions right now. We have it can either equal 1 or it can equal 0, because anything divided by itself is 1, so 0 divided by 0, it's the same number. 0 divided by itself could equal 1, But we also have 0 divided by anything is 0. So we also have another formula dictating that when we divide 0 by any number, it's 0. So this means that there could be a value for 0 divided by 0. We don't know. And that's exactly the definition of indeterminate. So indeterminate, a value could exist. We don't know if it does. And if it does, we don't know what the value is. But it all depends on the fact that it could exist and we don't know if it does exist. So now let's look at what happens when we try to raise 0 to 0. So again, let's talk about some very basic properties of math. So when we raise a to the 0th power, that just equals 1 when a does not equal 0. Okay, that's our basic property number 1. Number 2, when we raise 0 to a, it always equals 0 when a is not equal to 0. But what is it when a is 0? So let's take a look at that. And again, let's forget that. So now, I think you can probably see the similarity between the dividing 0 by 0 and this. When I replace a with 0 here, I get it's 1, because anything to the 0th power is 1. But then, when I replace a with 0 here, I get 0, because 0 to any power is 0. So, as you may have guessed, 0 raised to 0, we don't know what it is, therefore, it's indeterminate. So finally, I just want to talk about a couple examples. There's plenty more of these, but a couple that might trick you if you are asked these. So we'll start off with an easier one that you may be able to figure out pretty quickly. 0 divided by 1 to the negative 1. We don't have any problems with this right now because we have 0 divided by a number that isn't 0, which is fine. So let's just follow PEMDAS and we get 0 to the negative 1, right? What does negative 1 mean when it's an exponent? It just means we flip the fraction around. So this is actually just equal to 0 divided by 1 to the negative 1, which is exactly that. So you may have, when looking at this on your own, taken just a shortcut and realized that we're just going to get right back there. So in order to simplify, we just have to flip the fraction around, and we get 1 over 0, which is undefined. So now let's look at this one. And you may think, oh, well that's not an issue because I could just go and take the reciprocal right away like I would have here and gotten 0 over 1 equals 0. This isn't the case. You cannot do that because of PEMDAS. We have to do the parentheses first. So that's not right. And we actually have to divide 1 by 0 first, and we know that when we divide 1 by 0, that's just undefined. So yeah, that one's really tricky because you may want to take some shortcuts that math has given you, but you always have to go back to the roots and figure out, can I do this or not? And in this case, you can't, because the roots say you can't divide 1 by 0. Hi guys, if you enjoyed this video, please check out jumpmathematics.com, where we have hundreds of practice problems, several practice tests, and tons of instructional videos all for free. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.